I'd like to discuss with you one particular aspect of this week's Parashas Lecha about Avram Avinu, when the king of Sodom, after the Milchama, comes to shower gifts upon Avram, and he absolutely refuses. Harimosias Yodi takes a shvur. There's a Gemara in Chulin that tells us about a long dialogue that took place between Rami bar Dikuli, one of the greats of that generation, and Rav Chisda. Rami came from Pumbedisa to Sura, and it was Erev Yom Kippur, and he looked and scrounged around see if he could find tal. Tal is spleen. Spleen is something that's very difficult to kasher. It's full of dam, and you'd have to burn it, roast it over a fire. I still remember when my mother used to roast liver over the fire. But people didn't want to bother doing it. It just wasn't worth anything, and they threw it out. And in order to eat his seuda, the mitzvah of eating on Erev Yom Kippur, this Rami bar Dikuli would look for those chals that were thrown out, and he would take them and eat them. Rav Chisda asked him, wait a minute, we don't eat chal here in Surah. And to that, he gets response from Rami that I come from Pumbedisa, where Rabbi Yehuda paskins that we're allowed to eat chal if we kasher it properly with all the tircha that's involved. Then Rav Chisda says, but don't you want to accept a minhag here? The law is that when you come to this place, you have to. So Rami says to him, you know what? I go out of the tchum of the city of Surah, and therefore nobody sees me, and therefore I'm allowed to do my minhag. It's out of the yishuv. Then Rav Chisda asks him, well, how do you kasher the chal in order to eat it on Erev Yom Kippur? Where do you get fire when you're out there in the sticks? And he says, I get it from something called chartzanim. People used to throw away the pulp of grapes. It wasn't worth any money. And Rami would collect these pulps of the grapes and make them into a fuel where he could make a fire in order to kasher the chal. Then Rav Chisda notices that another thing is very strange about this great individual called Rami bar Dikuli. He's not wearing tefillin. And he asks him about it, and Rami responds by telling him, well, I'm a chole me'ayin, and the din is a chole me'ayin, someone who can't control his bowel, his stomach, he's potter from tefillin. He asks him, well, why aren't you wearing tzitzis? He says, because I don't have any begadim, I don't have clothing, it's all she'ula. And if you borrow something for less than 30 days, you're not chayav in tzitzis. In his great work on Musar, Reb Chaim Shulevitz points out that this Rami was so poor, he was absolutely destitute. Imagine, here's a man who on Erev Yom Kippur, the only food that he can get access to in order to be Makayim, that mitzvah of achila, is the chal that people just, they just throw it out. And he wants to make sure that he can eat this chal for the mitzvah. Imagine he's a person who can't afford not only food, but apparently can't afford garments. Everything that he has is borrowed. So Chaim makes the following observation. Could it be that such a great person came to Surah and he had this meeting with Rav Chisda, the Gadol Ador, and nobody invited him for a Sudas mitzvah on Erev Yom Kippur? Couldn't he have knocked on the door? Any Jew would certainly open his house on Erev Yom Kippur for such a Gadol and invite him for the great Seuda, the banquet of Erev Yom Kippur. But says Reb Chaim Shulevitz, we learned something very important here. According to the philosophy of Rami bar Dikuli, a person should not be dependent upon others. He should be self-independent. And Chazal say that if you have to come on to others and ask them for a handout, then it's better that you flay, the carcasses of an avela out in public and sell them, even though it's way, way below your dignity. And that's the message here, that we have to imitate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And just like God is a giver and never a taker, nobody could give anything to Hashem, so too we have to be givers through the mitzvah period of Rivya by giving life, through the mitzvah of Talmud Torah by giving the life of Torah Kihem Chayenu. We should find opportunities to do chesed and tzedakah to give life. and always be on the giving end, imitating Hashem, imitatio Deo, rather than be on the receiving end. And if you're not independent, but rather dependent, you get so used to it that you feel like an eved almost. You're a slave to other people. So therefore, our bracha is to be like Avram Avinu, who even took a shvur not to receive any benefits from the king of stone, so that he could be independent on his own, sonei matanos yichya, and be godlike. We should all follow in that moral message, following in the footsteps of Avram Avinu, Ken Yiratzon. Amen. Thank you, and have a great Shabbos.